All right. Hi, I'm Gabe, and this is an intro to Twine. Twine is used for visual novel and interactive novel purposes. It's very good if you want something that can be very customizable compared to something like RenPy, and you have a lot of control over what to do. And this for this workshop, I'm going to be going over the basics of making passages, hooks, lengths, and also working with variables. To start passages, that's where all the information goes into Twine. And for our project, let's name it. I'll just go through the one I made for this. We have 3 different passages. And to just create any passage, you just go on the top left corner of the screen and press new, and it'll instantly create a passage. And you have control over where to move them around. And then also one of your passages will be linked to this green icon, and that's where your story will start. If you want to change it, there's a button for starting a story. Also, something I forgot to mention is Twine uses different story formats, and they control how your program is coded. And for this workshop, I'm using Harlow, and it's used as a default, but there's a lot of different other story formats, and they work with different languages. The main advantage of Harlow is it comes with a lot of built-in macros, which allow to do a lot of different functionality inside the passage editing rather than using CSS and JavaScript. To start, every text we use goes into something called a hook. A hook is any code that goes within 2 square brackets. But when we have a lot more customizability about hooks if we put them into square brackets, and put any text into square brackets and then give it a name like this, by having a line, the hook name, and then either a caret pointing to it or a parentheses. The caret will cause the hook to instantly be visible on the scene, while the parenthesis will hide the hook. So if we run this, it will only be running intro 1 and intro 0 because those hooks have a caret on it, and this hook intro 2 does not have a caret on it. So if we press test from here, it will only show the text that says this is the first line of my passage, because that's the only text that's being displayed. You can technically put any text out on the screen, and write this is text and press test, and it will show it there. But the main disadvantage to that is that you won't be able to control it, and it will always be in this hook on the screen. Well, if you put your text into hooks, you'll have the option, as we'll see later, to hide hooks or reveal hooks later, and then also to save hooks and just do more things with them. So generally, it's best to avoid putting text right on the screen, unless it's a very simple screen that only has one set of text. And then another important detail in terms of having good control over your code is using these curly brackets. What they do is collapse the white space. So normally in Twine, if you don't have these, then any line you make in the code will reflect in the passage. And as you'll see, it's lower than what it would have been otherwise. And if you have a lot of code on a passage, this can cause your code to become really cluttered. And during my first project in Twine, I did not know about this, and I had all my code going on a single line without any white space, because I wanted to avoid the white space appearing in the passage, and that is not good for reading code. So whenever we have a new line, we always want to have these curly brackets. Next, for Twine, we have we are going to have in-passage links. This is is just any link that you can interact with. And there's two main kinds of in-passage links. There's this link, which is click page, and this will allow you to click anywhere on the page and for that to count as a link, versus the regular link, which works like a link, and you have the text that you want to have in the link. And whenever either you click on the page or click on the link, the hook that's attached to the link will be revealed. So you can put code in that link and that will be what appears. So in the sample passage, we have it so that when the page is clicked, it will run this code. But if we want to change it so that it's a link instead, we can do change it to link, and then we can say, let's say next, and then it will instead display as next instead of clicking the whole page. And both can be used for different reasons, but there's also a third kind of link that we'll be going over later. Now, what we're going to be doing with these links are showing new passages. You might want to have more than one passage on in your scene, and to do this, you hide the passage you're currently displaying and you show the new passage. You do this using the correctly named show and hide commands. And when you do that, you refer to the hook as a variable that starts with a question mark. That's how you tell Twine that that variable is a hook rather than just a standard variable. And you can also just type out question mark intro to, and it won't display anything. It will only work when it's inside of any sort of macros or code. And you can also, what this would normally be a regular variable, but you can use it to change what a hook says by doing, and then you can select new text to put inside the hook if you want to change the hook. The hooks can be used as that sort of variable, and generally with the passages, whenever you click on the next link, you'll hide your current passage and you'll show the new one. And then, but that's not the only kind of link you can have. Let's say you want to go from one passage into a new passage. This is done with a different kind of link where you highlight it with two brackets on each side, and then you have the link, what you want the link to show up as, and then an arrow into what new passage you want to have. So here we have two links to new passages, where if you click on left door, you'll go to this broom closet passage. And if you go to right door, you'll go to the hallway passage. A nice thing about Twine is it also creates a new passage when you type it in this link. So let's say you want to do middle door, it automatically creates one. And right now I only have it saying middle door. So it'll just be a link that goes to the passage of the same name. But if you want the passage and link to be different, you add the arrow and then you add what the actual passage should be called. And also one thing to avoid that it's often something you'll make a mistake with is adding a space between the arrow and this passage will create a space in the passage name, which means if you want to refer to the passage later, it has a space at the beginning, and that's generally easy to get mixed up on. So unless you for some reason want a space at the beginning of the passage name, you'll want to have it be directly after the caret. Now, some other things we can do in Twine are use variables. These work like variables in any other coding language, where you can have integers, strings, booleans, and any variable starts with a $sign as the variable. And when you want to create a variable or change it, you always do set, and then what you want the variable to be set as. And any sort of variable that's not set will automatically be referred to as 0. So if you see something saying like an error saying like cannot refer to this because it is 0, it's usually because that means it is you didn't declare the variable. And another easy way to create a variable is if you press the macro button and create value, you can set a lot of different kinds of variables, not including the regular main variables. You can also have colors, arrays, data maps, as well as random numbers. And you can easily do that outside of the Twine coding language. And another thing that, since it has variables, it also has conditionals, and they also work like any other coding language, where you type if and then the variable name with the $sign and then the conditional. And a thing to note about Twine is instead of doing equal signs, it says is instead. So if you want to test something, you test is it if is. And for this passage, we use the variable visits. And whenever we visit the hallway, it will set the visits equal to visits plus 1. And then it will display those visits in the hallway. But one thing that can be messed up with this is that when you go back to intro, as if I comment this out, or and play, and we go to the right door, and then go back, and then go to the right door. Wait, it's working? Oh, it's because I commented out the entire thing. If we declare the variable, and then what this does is it declares the variable, but it only declares it if it's your first time visiting the intro passage. Because if we just had it so it said set visits equal to 0, then that would make it so whenever you go back, visits would be 0 again. In order to avoid this, we use something called visited, and that is a macro that we can find using the macros tab. Macros are just any sort of program or code that you use in Twine or Halory, and you view it by pressing the macro button and then pressing view all macros, and you'll have a massive list of everything you can do here in Halory. And for this case, we would go to game state and then visited. And in addition to pressing it to add it, we can also press the link, and it'll take us directly to the documentation of that code. It takes a second to take you there, but you have like example usage, descriptions of it, and it also lets you sometimes test it. And that we can use in this passage to press add, and then you add visited, and you type the name of the passage you want to check, and then it will say where you visited. And that another way also, if you are debugging, another tool Twine gives you is this menu that shows all of the variables that are included in your story and what their value is. So it will check and update that number. And it'll update it in real time. And another thing you can see is if you press debug view, it shows you all the macros and code you use. And it'll check things like if statements, and it'll show all the logic that Twine goes through. How it checks that since if it checks if visits is 1, and it'll say visits is 2. So the Boolean is false, and the hook underneath is viewed. And you can use all these things when debugging much larger passages and seeing what goes wrong. But there's one macro that's very important to use, especially for larger passages, and it's the custom macro. This essentially lets you create your own custom function or class in Twine, and it's used by creating a variable as a macro. In this case, it's get tumbleweed, and then instead of setting it to a variable, you set it as a macro. And then what this is essentially what the macro will take. So in this case, it takes a string, and then inside of the output part of it, you can put any code that's tied to the macro. So instead of typing out all this code for times you want to have a tumbleweed appear in the passage, you just type get tumbleweed. I'll show you an example. Yes. Instead of typing out all that, you do get tumbleweed and then a colon, and then the variable you want to have as the send, and then it will create that. And when instead of sending you back to writing a different one for wherever you want to send it back, you do go to send, and then it'll go to the place you set it to go to. And this can be used for a lot of different purposes, in keeping like a massive story like this much more condensed. But a lot of what this story shows and a lot of what Twine uses is HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. A lot of what these passages have been are very dull, not really stylized or have any audio either. And the role of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript in Twine is to add more function, color, and images to your passages. Now, while other languages do this, this allows you to have much more customization of how things look in Twine, and how to customize your passages even further, and make your Twine passages more directly what you want it to look like. And now this isn't a tutorial for HTML, CSS, or JavaScript. Those are more outside resources, and there's a lot of good places such as W3 schools where you can learn how to use those coding languages. But essentially, for Twine, you can directly insert any HTML code into a Twine passage, such as this, which inserts an image, and that will appear in the Twine passage. And for CSS, if you press story, it will give you a CSS menu where you can declare a CSS for your entire Twine story. JavaScript's a bit less needed for Twine, since you can already do a lot of logic and interactivity through custom macros. But a usage for the JavaScript passage is extensions for Twine, such as this one I extended, which is audio in Twine. It doesn't look the prettiest, but basically you can copy the code from an extension, a public extension such as Halloway Audio Library, and that lets you use codes from those extensions in Twine in order to create custom sound. Now, unfortunately, a limitation of HTML in Twine is that when you run local images through HTML, such as here where it's searching the image folder and then getting this image, is that when you press test from here, it doesn't like the images. It doesn't search your computer for images. So in order to run it, you actually have to find the HTML file for your passage and then run it there. So you have to go to your folder, find the specific .html image, .html file, and then execute it in order to run, which is a lot more inconvenient than the regular Twine interface where you can test things. So generally when you run HTML, you test it after implementing your logic. So that way you can test everything first. And now that's all for the intro to Twine workshop. If there's any questions?
So why do you choose, what makes you prefer Twine? And, you know, obviously you're working with elements here that are fighting into instead of using audio that way. What makes you prefer Twine for your projects or whatever?
It gives you a lot more customization compared to RenPy, in that like you can since you use HTML, while it's a lot more confusing, you can set the exact height and location for every single element. And when you're not creating just a standard visual novel, you can create a lot more different menus and such. Whereas something like RenPy gives you a lot more tools straight out the bat, like a text log and creating images right off the bat. It's generally within RenPy's framework. And it uses Python, which it gives the interactivity, but it isn't as compatible with languages such as HTML. So it's definitely a pick what you prefer, because with Twine, it is very easy to do stuff like what's the word? Interact. Why can't I think of the word? It's not visual. Just direct interactive fiction, choose your own adventure styles, stories, and can I think? No, it's like where it's well, yes, text adventures, but like the real world sort of like hidden going through sites and stuff. ARGs, yes, that's what I was thinking of. Thanks. And ARGs, well, RenPy is definitely more for visual novels. Twine can do more visual novels that are a bit more with different structures and more direct layouts.
Any other questions?